So the way we're going to do that is, firstly, we're going to make these clickable. Right now, if you click these, nothing happens. So let's do that. Let's go implement the method required for that. The method required is going to be called did select item at index path. Here we're going to have to perform segue with identifier and go to the storyboard, which shows the particular user and allows us to chat. But before we do that, let's go to the main storyboard and create a new view controller. Drag that in. As always, set its size to 4.7 inches. And embed it into a navigation controller. Control drag from the UI connection view controller to the navigation controller. Present modally. Click on the segue and let's name that chat. Okay. Coming here, let's reset the title to a generic name, which is going to be user's name. This is where we'll update the user's name. We'll also add a button, which is going to allow the user to go back to the collection view controller. Coming back to the user's collection view controller, now let's perform the segue. Self.perform segue with identifier. The segue name is chat, and the sender is going to be the particular user that's clicked on. It's going to be override. So as of now, we'll be able to click on the user and go into the particular user's page to chat with the user, but we also want to pass some data along with that. So for that, we're going to have to override the perform with segue function. First, we'll have to call the super prepare for segue method, and we'll just leave that as segue, and the sender is going to be the sender that is passed along with it. Let's call the navigation controller nav view controller. Since we have a nav view controller in the middle, we'll have to go via the navigation controller. So let's set that up. And let's call the chat view controller the chat VC. The first controller in that, and we're going to call it chat view controller. And we're going to data that we're going to pass is the sender's ID, which is going to be the logged in user's ID. We need to know which user is trying to chat with the particular user, and we'll also pass the data of the user that we want to chat with, which is going to be we'll call it receiver data, and will be equal to the sender. What we need to do is now, since we don't already have a chat view controller set up, we'll have to go and create that. Let's call this chat view controller, and it's going to be a subclass of the UI view controller. Go to the main storyboard, select this new view controller that we created, and set its class to the chat view controller. As of now, we don't have a sender ID variable set up in the chat view controller, and neither do we have the receiver data. So now our job is to set these up in the chat view controller. Let's go to the chat view controller. For basically the chat view, what we're going to do is we're going to use this library called JSQ messages view controller. I'll put the link for the GitHub repository of the JSQ message controller in the description. Basically what this does, it gives us a nice UI for the chat application. And instead of us implementing it ourselves, we can just import this and use this. Also, to implement this, there's a very nice tutorial by Ray Vanderwick, for which I'll also put in the link below in the description. We'll tweak this to suit our application and use it in a real-time example. So let's begin. I'll walk you through how we're going to do that. The first thing we need to do is open up item, go into our project folder and open the pod file. In the pod file, we're going to have to install JSQ messages view controller. So let's do that. That's all we need to do. Save this, exit it, and pod install. I'm sure you're familiar with this. So now what we'll have to do is we'll have to rebuild our application in order to make this available in the application. But before we rebuild the application, let's go to the users collection view controller and comment out these two lines. Because of this error, the app will not build. Come back to the chat view controller, and to build the application, we just press Command B. Now that the build is succeeded, we can import the JSQ messages view controller. Also, we need to change this implementation of the chat view controller to be of type JSQ messages view controller. Now let's look at the code that we need to set up a message view controller. We'll start by setting up the data source and the delegate. Like you see here, to display messages, you need a data source to provide objects that conform to the JSQ message data protocol, and need to implement a number of delegate methods. So let's start by copying this line of code here. This basically declares a messages variable, which is an array of type JSQ message. Then we need to set up the delegate methods of the JSQ message data protocol. We'll put them in here at the bottom. Basically, the first method returns the message, and the second method returns the number of messages. The next thing we need to do is we need to set up the color of the message bubble depending on what color an outgoing message will show and what color an incoming message will show. So we'll set up these two variables. Outgoing message bubble image view and incoming bubble image view. Next, we'll set up a function called setup bubbles. All this does is basically it uses an inbuilt JSQ bubble image factory method, and it sets the color of the outgoing image and incoming image. So as you can see, the outgoing is going to be colored blue and incoming is going to be colored light gray. Next we need to do is we need to call setup bubbles in the view did load. Set up the message bubbles. Now we need to check that every time that a message is displayed, we need to check if it's sent by the logged in user or it has been sent by the person the user is chatting with. So let's copy this method and paste it at the bottom. The first line gets the message. The second line checks if it is sent or it is received, and depending on that, it shows the appropriate color of the bubble. Next, as of now, what we'll do is we're not setting any image for the user. So we'll just put this in. What this does is this will not display any image of the user in the chat. And also we'll remove the avatars by putting this line of code in the view did load. If you guys want images in your chat, you can change this code accordingly. So now let's come to creating the messages. For that, we can use a simple function called add message, which we'll put at the bottom again. Let's get rid of this code and let's put in add message. Add a new message. Basically what this method does is it gets the message, which basically passes the sender's ID. The display name is blank. We'll display the name in the title bar of the chat page, and it gets the text of the message, and then it appends it to the messages array. Just to show you how it looks, we can hard code some messages into the viewDidAppear method. So below the viewDidLoad, let's call the viewDidAppear method. Now before we test this out, if you remember, when we click on the user and the user's collection view controller, we were passing some data which we had commented out. So let's uncomment that. Also, this receiver data variable has not been set up in the chat view controller. This is not there in the Ray Wenderlich tutorial. This is what we'll be using ourselves. So let's put this up here. We'll call it var receiver data is equal to any object. Also, there's one more thing that we need to do here. We need to send the sender's name. So let's do that. So basically, sender display name is a variable that is required by the JS message view controller. If we want, we can set this up in the chat view controller, but since we know the sender's details, we can pass it in from here only. So let's do that. So what we'll do is sender.object for key and name, and ensure that it is forced downcast as a string. So now this is done. We can also come back to the chat view controller, and here we can say title equal to sender display name, so that it updates the title in the chat page. Now let's try and run this. Now if you go to the users page, click on a user, there we see the name of the user is coming in the title, and we have these hard-coded messages. We can use a quick fix to change the color of the text to make it more visible. So let's do that. Coming back here, there's this method, which is basically the default method we have for a collection view. Self or item and index path. We don't have to override any method of the JSQ messages view controller to do this. So we just use this method, we'll copy it, and I'll walk you through it. Let's just paste this in here. Basically what this method is doing is, it sets up the cell as a JSQ message collection view cell, gets the message, checks if the sender ID is a logged in user and changes the color to white. If it's a incoming message, it changes the text color to black. Now if we quickly run this and have a look, there you see it, the text is more visible. So as of now, we can only see hard-coded messages. Now is the time we actually connect to our Firebase database and actually send and receive messages and store the conversation in our Firebase database, which can be accessed at any time. To start with that, let's create a reference to our Firebase database. For that, first, let's import Firebase database into our app. Then let's create a reference to our database. Let's call it root ref fir database dot reference. Let's write the actual methods that we need to send and receive messages. So the method that we need to send the message is given here, which is basically, it's called did press send button. Let's copy this method. So what this method basically does is it creates a node on our database where the message will be stored. We're going to change this to our custom node, and then it basically just stores the message. It stores the text of the message and the sender ID, sets it up at the database. This method here plays the sound, and this ensures that the message sending is complete. So let's change this up. Let's remove this and change this to let item ref equal to root ref, which is the reference we created, dot child, and we'll create a node called messages inside that. Under the messages node, we'll create another node called, which will basically be a unique ID for the conversation. So let's just call that convo ID. We'll reference to it as self because we declare it outside. We haven't declared it yet, so it'll give us an error. And under that, let it automatically add another ID for each message. So coming up to the top here, we need to declare a variable called convo ID of type string. And what we'll set the convo ID to is basically in the view did load, we'll set it as a combination of the receiver's UID and the sender's UID, so that it's unique to only those two users. So let's do that. Let receiver ID equal to, remember we had passed in receiver data from our users collection view controller, dot object for key and UID as string, and because using the whole UID is going to make it very long, let's just take the first 5 characters of the UID. So let's say let receiver ID 5 equal to string receiver ID dot characters dot prefix 5. Same thing for the sender ID. Since we already have the sender ID available to us in the JSQ messages view controller, what we'll do is we'll say let sender ID 5 equal to string sender ID dot characters dot prefix and 5. Now let's combine these two. So let's first check if sender ID 5 is greater than receiver ID 5, set the convo ID equal to sender ID 5 plus receiver ID 5, else self.convo ID equal to receiver ID 5 plus sender ID 5. This ensures that the order of the two combining always remains the same. Okay, now coming here, the convo ID error has gone, and now if we send the message, it should get stored into the database. Let's run this. We should delete these hard-coded messages, but let's ignore that for now. So let's just send a message. As you can see, the message got sent, but there's nothing displayed over here. Let's go check in our database. So there you see there's a messages tab that's come up. It's a combination of the first 5 IDs of one user ID and the other user ID. Under that we have an auto-generated ID, and there we have the sender's ID and the text. Now we have the messages getting stored, but we need to also get the messages real time from the database to display them. So for that, we'll put in the next method, which is this function over here. Let's copy this, come to the bottom, paste this in here. So we're going to have to change this up a little bit. Basically, we're going to first have to remove this line. And what we'll have to add is, this line is basically getting the last 25 messages, but it's referring to the root, which we need to change to make it refer to our root in our database. So let's see what we're going to do. We'll call it let messages query equal to root ref, and we want it to go inside the child under messages self dot convoy id, force unwrap that, and then limit the query to the last 25. You can limit it to whatever you want or not limit it according to what you like. And we're going to have to change this method up as well, because it requires a with block. So we're going to say messages query dot observe event type of type child added. Anytime a message is added, you need to update it with block and call it snapshot in, and we're going to end this out here. And get rid of this line. What it's going to ask us to do is going to ask us to force unwrap these. Let's force unwrap these. And once we have the data, let's add it back to the add message using the add message and finish receiving messages. Let's also get rid, or we have to make sure that we call this method, the view did appear method. Let's go into the view did appear, get rid of these hard-coded messages and instead call observe messages. Now let's run this and see. See, as you see here, the message hey that we had sent earlier is here as well. How are you? And the message is getting sent. You're not being able to hear the sound of sending the message because I have my headphones on, but you'll be able to hear it when you do it. Similarly, when the other user sends the message back to you, you'll be able to see it real time. Now the only thing that is left is to show an indicator when the user is typing. Ray has covered that in his tutorial, but it's only for an anonymous chat. So we're going to change this up a little bit to tweak it to our application. To start with, what we need to do is just copy this, paste this here. Let's change this up a little. Change this to is equal to any object. Okay, what this line of code over here is doing is basically, firstly we're creating a reference that tracks whether the local user is typing. Then we store whether the local user is typing into a private property, which is called local typing here. And then basically we update user is typing ref each time we update this property of is typing. So let's change this to self.user is typing ref and force unwrap this. Next, basically we have to add a method. It's called observe typing. Let's paste that into the bottom over here. Basically this creates a reference to the URL of typing indicator, which is where you will update the typing status of the user. And since we don't want this to be remaining after the user is logged out, we can delete it once the user is left using the on disconnect remove value. But we're going to change this a little. This is directly putting it under typing indicator. Let's change this and put it under a particular conversation. Let's change this up a little. Change this to is equal to any object. Okay, what this line of code over here is doing is basically, firstly we're creating a reference that tracks whether the local user is typing. Then we store whether the local user is typing into a private property, which is called local typing here. And then basically we update user is typing ref each time we update this property of is typing. So let's change this to self.user is typing ref and force unwrap this. Next, basically we have to add a method. It's called observe typing. Let's paste that into the bottom over here. Basically this creates a reference to the URL of typing indicator, which is where you will update the typing status of the user. And since we don't want this to be remaining after the user is logged out, we can delete it once the user is left using the on disconnect remove value. But we're going to change this a little. This is directly putting it under typing indicator. So let's change this to rootref.child messages self.convo id. Under that we'll put it inside typing indicator. Then what we do is let users typing query equal to typing indicator ref dot query ordered by value dot query equal to value true. Then we'll basically set up an observer for changes to any value, and this will give us an update anytime anything changes. So users typing query dot observe event type dot value with block snapshot fir data snapshot in if snapshot dot children count is equal to 1 and self dot is typing, then don't do anything. Basically it will check that if the number of people typing in the conversation is equal to 1 and that person typing is you, then don't show any indicator. Else check if the other user is typing. So we'll do that by doing self.show typing indicator equal to snapshot dot children count greater than 0 and self dot scroll to bottom animated equal to true. So basically if there are more than 0 users and the local user isn't typing, it's safe for us to say that the other user is typing and we should show the indicator. Now let's try and run this out and we should see the indicator updating. Type hey. As you see, we got an error over here because observing the typing is also observing messages, because we said any changes to the typing, any value added under messages will give us an error. So we need to make sure over here, let me clarify that to you. Since the typing indicator is getting added under messages, this observer will also run. So we need to make sure that we check for the value of snapshot. So if snapshot.value sender ID is not equal to nil, only then run this line of code. That means it will only run if a message is actually added and not when a user is typing. Let's clear this up and let's run this again. Now if we type over here, suppose we type hey, okay, so we're not getting an error, but if we go here and see, this has got updated to typing indicator is getting updated to true. So let's just copy this and add it inside typing indicator and set its value to true. There you see the indicators come up. If we set its value to false, it should go away. When we set back to true, it comes again. And when we type, it gets updated over here, but nothing happens over here. And even when we move it, it goes. So suppose we send a message here saying test, it moves up, the message gets added, and the typing indicator is still showing true because the other user is still typing. So let's just remove this to false again, and there it works again. So what we've been able to do in this tutorial is we've been able to create a system by which we can see whether the user is online or offline. We can also chat with that particular user in a private chat. At the same time, we can also see when the user is typing. It's taken a long while to put all of this together, but I think the outcome has been pretty good. The only thing that's left now is to show when the user was last online. I think this is a challenge for you guys to try and figure it out. As you guys already remember that when the user logs in, we've already passed a timestamp along with the connections tab, and you can see the last online tab of the user inside the connections. All you need to do is bring this timestamp back and convert it into a date. The last thing I just want to show you before we go is how this actually works between a real phone and a simulator. So I've logged the user in onto my phone and I'm going to send a message from there. So you should see the message coming up now. There you have it. I just sent a message from there. Now I'll start typing. And you can see that the typing indicator is showing up. And then I deleted it and the typing indicator disappears. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. And we'll dig into something new in the next video. And thanks for watching.